Hello, my name's Mr. Salles, and here we are in Act 1, Scene 5 of the ultimate course to Macbeth, which will show you how to get grade 9 if you watch all the videos, and you will easily get grade 7. Our central question today is, how far does Lady Macbeth influence Macbeth? Now, the traditional view is that she is very, very responsible for this. She is the kind of Eve figure to Macbeth's Adam, and she uses her temptation, her sexuality, and her psychological manipulation to force Macbeth to kill Duncan. Well, you may take that point of view, but I am going to introduce you to something deeper. The first quotation we need to look at is this letter that Macbeth has written his wife, and he calls her "my dearest partner in greatness," and he repeats the word greatness when he talks about the greatness that is promised thee. So let's focus on the word partner. This is extraordinary in Jacobean times, in Shakespeare's time, but even more extraordinary 500 years before, when Macbeth is set. Women, as you know, were subservient to men. The society was a patriarchy, and therefore a wife was a husband's property. But not so in this marriage. Here, Lady Macbeth and Macbeth are equals. Of course, that's not legally the case, but Macbeth is telling his wife, "I'm treating you as an equal." He says, "I have thought good to deliver thee this news." So he's obviously thought about whether he should tell her about the witch's promises. Now, that's a valuable clue because it tells us he's planning on a reaction. He's anticipated what her reaction is going to be. This plan that she suddenly formulates to kill Duncan isn't something that comes out of thin air. It's something that Macbeth knows that she will come up with, and it gives us a purpose to the letter. Well, let's consider the letter. He arrives shortly after she's read it and had her soliloquy to the audience. So the letter's been there, 20 minutes before Macbeth arrives? Like, why take the time to write it? It would certainly have taken him longer than 20 minutes to write it and get a messenger to carry it. Well, it's because that interval, that time interval, is going to give her time to come up with a plan. It's cunning because it means Macbeth knows that he is too full of the milk of human kindness, as Lady Macbeth is going to say. He knows that without her help, he won't be able to kill Duncan. So he writes to her in order to encourage her to help him to kill Duncan. Now let's see how Macbeth manipulates her before we consider how she manipulates him. His letter is really concerned with status. You'll remember that thee and thou are informal and suggest a lower status. That's what he calls Lady Macbeth. He emphasises her lower status. It's also used to convey his love, and then he contrasts that with "my dearest partner in greatness." In other words, he's encouraging her to imagine being queen more quickly. Now, the other factor we need to consider is that the letter is written in prose. The convention in Shakespeare's plays is that characters who are of low social status speak in prose, the murderers, for example, and the porter, but characters with high social status speak in iambic pentameter. Macbeth does not write his letter in iambic pentameter. Why? Because it emphasises to Lady Macbeth that she is of low status, and that he, Macbeth, is still of low status compared to "what is promised thee shall be king hereafter, she shall be queen." So this is a really subtle manipulation where his letter reminds her of her own low status as a woman and their own low status compared to what's been promised, being king and queen. And that's how he gets her to come up with a plan. He knows that she is outraged at the patriarchal society. He knows that she is an intellectual equal to him, and he treats her as an equal, and he shares her understanding that society's rules do not allow her to succeed. they don't allow any woman to succeed independently. The only way they can succeed is through marriage to a successful man. So when he introduces this possibility of her becoming queen, it's like an explosion of ambition that goes off in her mind. Then we find out really quickly that Lady Macbeth has this insight into her husband's kindness. Now this is the opposite of the cruel killer, the bloodthirsty assassin that we've seen on the battlefield. But she knows fundamentally he's a good human being. He doesn't bring that warrior essence into civilized life. Milk suggests innocence, of course, through the association with white, and you'll pick that up when she says to him later, "I shame to wear a heart so white." For her, it's also a symbol of cowardice and surrender, the white flag that a surrendering soldier would use. But let's consider what has just happened to Lady Macbeth. She is a mother who has just lost her baby. She asked the murdering ministers to come to her woman's breast and take her milk for gall. She's still lactating. That's how recently her baby and Macbeth's baby has died. This is their only child. And when we fully understand the grief that she must feel and that Macbeth must feel, now we can get an idea of why becoming king, that ambition, and her becoming queen might try and replace that great hole of grief that they have inside them through the loss of their child. When she says Macbeth is too full of the milk of human kindness, it's the mother's milk. And so she feminizes Macbeth. She portrays him as the mother in this image, full of milk, ready to give to the baby. She has to use that grief against him. Now in this quotation we need to focus on the word illness. Now it's traditional to see Macbeth's hamartia as ambition, but Lady Macbeth dismisses that. She says, look, he's got ambition, but that is not enough. So the next traditional interpretation is to say, well, it isn't enough. Lady Macbeth is enough. She converts that ambition into illness through her poisonous words, her gall. But if we remember that Macbeth has sent her the letter in order to bring out this poisonous persuasion from her, suddenly we understand that Macbeth is using her deviousness to manipulate him. He knows this is what's going to happen. He is counting on it. Shakespeare uses Lady Macbeth to criticise what happens to men in a patriarchal society. Lady Macbeth wants her milk converted to gall, and she wants to be filled with cruelty. She associates cruelty with masculinity, cruelty with power. When she imagines being queen, she talks about being filled from the crown to the toe. Now that's backwards. It should be from the toe to the crown. But the reason she mentions crown first, because it means the top of the head, is that she's also fixated on the crown that she will wear as queen, the crown that Macbeth will wear as king. Her language suggests that in order to be king and queen, they must be the most cruel. And this brings us to another Shakespearean purpose here. The play is put on for King James. Shakespeare is putting it on in 1605, a moment in history where King James could choose justifiably to be the most cruel in repressing Catholic terrorists. He's got every justification to seek out the enemy within. Shakespeare is asking King James to pull back from that kind of military, cruel solution to the political problems he has in England. When Macbeth arrives, Lady Macbeth feminizes him again. She asks him to look like the innocent flower, a feminine image of innocence, but to be the serpent under it. Now, obviously, we associate that immediately with original sin, the temptation of Eve in the Garden of Eden. So the audience simply takes that original sin and sees Lady Macbeth as the embodiment of it. But let's dig a little deeper. Who persuades Eve to eat the fruit of the forbidden tree of the knowledge of good and evil? The serpent. Who does she ask Macbeth to be? The serpent. She knows he's written the letter to her, like the serpent has done, to tempt her. She knows Macbeth is tempting her to come up with a plan to kill Duncan. Shakespeare's audience probably chooses not to notice that because it's a patriarchal society and they are conditioned to see women as more evil than men. King James wrote about this himself in his book Demonology. That was the political view of the time, but not so Shakespeare's view. And so Shakespeare introduces this brilliant metaphor where he shows that actually Macbeth, as the serpent, is manipulating Lady Macbeth to manipulate him. Complicated, but I think you understand it, and it's got loads of layers of meaning, which is grade 7, 8 and 9. It's yours for the taking. Now, the other thing that metaphor does is it stops us seeing Lady Macbeth as the most evil partner in the marriage. And that's going to be important later, because when Macbeth goes back to the witches, what do they say? By the pricking of my thumbs, something wicked this way comes. They're talking about Macbeth. By the end of the play, Macbeth's evil is out in the open. And so I'm going to suggest here that Macbeth is far more responsible for his hamartia, his downfall, than Lady Macbeth is. Lady Macbeth says, "Come you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts." Now, it's easy to read that word tend as kind of feed on mortal thoughts, as though they're infecting Lady Macbeth's thoughts. But that's not what it meant at the time. Tend meant attend to, be the servant to. And so here, Lady Macbeth is saying, I am the master, and you spirits have to do my bidding, because you have to obey the mortal thoughts. Now we understand that she and Macbeth are the ones with the evil thoughts. It's not the witch's evil thoughts that drive this tragedy. They give Macbeth the opportunity, but it's his innate evil and her innate evil that makes it happen. Now, with a tragic hero, we need to be able to empathise with the hero so that we can have some sympathy for their downfall. And that's why Shakespeare chooses original sin. The whole point of original sin is that we're all descended from Adam and Eve, and therefore we all share this innate capacity for evil. Shakespeare's wider purpose is to say that in a patriarchal society and a martial warlike society, evil is a more natural human action. It's a more natural response to that kind of politics. Therefore, if he can soften that sort of society so that it's less military and less patriarchal, there will be less evil. This is a way to influence King James and the society that he creates. So the end of this scene is extraordinary. Lady Macbeth has the last word. To allow her to have the last word deliberately disrupts the patriarchy. So, supporters of the patriarchy will use that to show that Lady Macbeth is terribly evil, not just going against God, but going against all the social rules. Shakespeare, on the other hand, could be pointing out that women ought to be able to have more power, just like Lady Macbeth gets power in this marriage. He's arguing that if power were given to husbands and wives equally, they wouldn't use that power for evil. Society would not be loading it against them, and therefore ambition wouldn't spur them. They would not be motivated to commit murder. When Shakespeare wants to show that partners are in agreement, he has them share a 10-syllable line. So Macbeth's words were 5 syllables long, only look up clear from Lady Macbeth another 5 syllables, completing the iambic pentameter. Her next line is also 10 syllables, and that would be the perfect end to the scene if we were going to have harmony. But we're not, we're going to have tragedy, and therefore she adds a line, leave all the rest to me, 6 syllables long, and Macbeth does not reply. This symbolises how he has lost power in this relationship, or he hasn't lost it, he has transferred it, he has given it to his wife because he needs her to come up with a plan to kill Duncan. His conscience will stop him doing that. He still wants it though. The iambic pentameter emphasises the word all and me and conveys how she is assuming total control. Now this is really interesting because, as we'll see, she doesn't actually kill Duncan. But when we get to that scene, you'll see that she desperately wants to. And it's the patriarchal society which stops her, and why she decides to be unsexed. Like, why does Shakespeare put that in the play? It's because he wants to point out that this society only benefits men. And because it only benefits men, in order to get benefit, she has to become masculine. That's what's wrong with the society. Shakespeare's suggesting that the extreme patriarchal view that women are evil and subservient creates rebellion. Lady Macbeth's rebellion is to be expected, not because she is a sinful woman, but because society has victimised her.